Hello and welcome to DHub MT YouTube channel podcast brought to you by European Digital Innovation Hub and powered by MDIA, Malta Digital Innovation Authority. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Claire Cassar. Throughout the years, Dr. Cassar has been fortunate to gain experience in a wide array of work settings, ranging from a law firm and a large international corporation to several dynamic startups, before embarking on her own entrepreneurial journey in partnership with others. In fact, today she's one of the directors of D4 and 6. Claire, today we're going to focus on cybersecurity, and I am sure the term would be familiar to our viewers, but maybe not all of us know what it exactly means, and more than what it means, what it incorporates.
Yeah.
So I think I would start off from there.
Absolutely. So if we had to say very widely, let me start off from a previous point. All companies today, all organizations are information companies. They hold data, whether it's personal data or business data. So in a way, we can say that nowadays everyone works in the IT space. We are all IT companies. Now, the minute that you actually have data and you store data, that data requires certain security aspects to make sure that the data is kept safe. And this is exactly what cybersecurity is about, making sure that third parties do not hack into your data, do not do anything to the data to disrupt it, and making sure that whatever is stored in these data spaces is actually kept in a secure manner. For instance, when you have your details stored with the bank or details stored with an insurance agency, such as, I don't know, your home list of valuables stored with an insurance agency, the last thing you want to do is for a hacker to actually go in and break into the data stores of those insurance companies and actually take the data and know all your valuables that you have in your house, and then be able to plan from there how to get hold of them in your stead.
In fact, I think when we actually think about it, our data is everywhere. Yeah. Our personal data is held at the bank, at the insurance company, and there's an element of trust. I am trusting my bank, I am trusting my insurance company to keep my data safe. I am trusting the shop I have bought things from with the data. So are these companies responsible for the data of their consumers, of their customers, their clients?
Absolutely. In fact, I can take it even further. Think about all the e-commerce that we do online, all the online payments, all the websites that we're connected to, all the passwords that we have to our email addresses, to all the stores that we buy from online, where we give our credit card details, where we give all this information. All of these companies are responsible to actually store that information about you. Now, obviously, not only is it the data that you provide, but they would even have information about what you've browsed on the site, how long you've stayed on a certain page, what are the products that you like, so they can actually really profile you in terms of their offering in order to be able to really understand what their clients are all about. And obviously, as you said very correctly, you need to trust. Now, in order to trust, these companies need to have the level of security necessary to make sure that when you are interacting with them and you've decided to engage and trust them with your data, that the data is kept in a very secure manner.
So if I had to ask you, what would be the top advice that you would give to startups or SMEs, especially in the early stages when it comes to cybersecurity, what would you say it is?
I would say maybe it's a bit of an overused acronym, but cybersecurity by design. So don't underestimate and think about it as an afterthought later on in the process.
As an extra thing.
Exactly. But from the very beginning, by design, whether you're designing a new software, an app, whether you're designing a new business model, make sure that the data and how it will be stored securely and who you trust as a third party to offer you these services are people who have a very good, solid reputation in the market and know what they are doing. Just to give you an idea, in October, there was a huge hack in the US, a company called Okta, which does access management, and one of their clients is 1Password. Now, 1Password is an app that hundreds of thousands of people use, and having one main password, then you store all your other passwords on it. So by let's say the main company, which then 1Password is related to, having been hacked, casinos were hacked, hundreds of millions of dollars were lost, but obviously 1Password actually got affected. They luckily they had the security in place and they stopped part of the attack, but imagine if all their client data and all the passwords of all their clients actually had gone out into the open and into the dark web, and mayhem could have happened. Okay, so these are real things that are happening around us. Sadly, a lot of people think that this will not happen to us. I mean, as a company here in Malta where we operate, we hear it a lot, sadly, that companies say, with Malta, we're small and so on. But when you think of the size of businesses and the large storage of data that we have, and we do have the type of companies that we mentioned, but we have a lot of other sectors like fintech and gaming, which are also very large and having large amounts of client data, brought from a payment side and from personal data. The implications if you get hacked is huge. And we know of a few big major incidents that we've had in this country in the past few years. So let's not underestimate that because of our size, the minute we're connected to the World Wide Web and we're connected internationally through the internet, then we are subject to hacks like everybody else.
True. Unfortunately, sometimes until something happens and we hear about it and it's on a bigger scale, we wouldn't realize the damage. But I think what we're bringing today and what we're trying to share with the viewers is the importance of preventing. We always say that prevention. Prevention should be the first step. And I think it's what it is when it comes to cybersecurity. What would you say are the most secure methods of ensuring data integrity?
Well, I mean, data integrity has a variety of ways in how you do it. First and foremost, when we talk about data integrity, we're talking that from the moment that you input the data in a system, so as a user, I've given you my personal details, my credit card details, etc., that information remains as I have provided it and remains the same throughout unless I actually change it. And that is what data integrity is about. What you input is what comes out. Now, sometimes the data has to go through algorithms to actually be processed, either for a payment purpose or because we want to send you an email and we want to pick out your name to make it more personalized, etc., etc. But the important thing is that if I've written my name in a certain way, every single time it keeps coming up in the same manner, just to use a very, very simplistic example. So when we talk about data integrity, we're talking about, for instance, access controls. Who are the people who have access to the data? Who can change that data, and should they be able to change it or not? Can an administrator who has higher rights in the system go in and, just for the fun of it, change somebody's details or pick out credit card details of somebody in particular? So that's one. The second is where you store the data. We talk a lot about data centers, storing in the cloud and so on. But who are you storing at? Is it a trusted partner? Do they have the right security features in place? So that is one other way of looking at it. Then there are certain algorithms, like hash, for instance, and checksum algorithms, which actually make sure they run in the background to make sure that the data, through various checks, remains good throughout the journey, until such time as the data is no longer required and you should dispose of that data. So then it ties in also to GDPR, retention of data for a long period of time, etc. In fact, one curious thing to say is that with the GDPR, which came into force in 2018, nowadays half of the regulation on GDPR is all about data security. So if you store any personal data, half of what you are required to do is make sure that you have all these things in place, like we're talking about in terms of data integrity.
How can businesses prepare for emerging regulations in the cybersecurity space? Now we have mentioned businesses before,
yes.
And I think obviously it should be our highlight. How can they regulate and obviously emerge these regulations in a cybersecurity space?
Yes, first and foremost, one of the things we encourage clients to do, and as you said correctly, it's all about prevention. When we started off as the forensics way back in 2014, it was not even mentioned. Cybersecurity was something that in Malta was not yet so widespread and common as a topic. At the time, we used to do a lot more post-event analysis. So somebody gets hacked and we go into forensic analysis to actually see. We used to help out sometimes the police corps or the courts with court expertise to unravel what would have happened in a particular case. Nowadays, 80% of our time is focused on the preventative side. So for instance, let's say a company changes a provider or introduces a new software in the company. At that point, it would be very prudent to do some sort of penetration testing to get an outsider to try to break your system, but obviously under your control, and make sure that if there are any gaps, any flaws in the system or any configuration that needs to be arranged, you would rather get to know by hiring somebody to try to break it and tell you how to make it more secure, rather than being subject to a cybersecurity attack later on in the process.
Okay.
When it comes to regulation, this year we're talking a lot about the EU Cybersecurity Act. In essence, it's not changing much. It's continuing to build on what is already existent. But one of the things that it encourages companies to do is companies in this space which offer services and products on a cyberspace level, let's say, to actually get certification to make sure that their services, if I'm offering a software, an application in the market, that I get cybersecurity certified. So I can put people's mind at rest and raise the profile of the services that I'm offering or the products that I'm offering in the market. So what regulation is doing is really and truly trying to catch up with the technology, because the technology is there already. There are a lot of tools available and there are a lot of companies which are already helping businesses to become more robust in terms of their infrastructure. However, the regulation is just making it easier and encouraging a lot of companies on a voluntary basis to go for certification as well.
Is there a way that possibly these businesses can mitigate these risks and protect themselves against cyber attacks? Is there something that they can do?
Well, yes. I mean, one of the things we always love to say is it should stop being a discussion left to the IT people in the IT department and being looked at as a cost center, but it should be used as a differentiating factor. And one of the ways of doing that is raising the discussion to the boardroom level. As part of a company's strategy, being secure and making sure that you are not the subject of a cyber attack, which, by the way, when personal data is involved under the GDPR, you are obliged to actually inform the authorities. So then what happens? It becomes a reputational risk as well. So then as a brand, you can actually have a reputational damage, which will tarnish your company's reputation. I mean, in Malta, maybe we haven't seen it happen, but for instance, in the US, you can actually see stock prices of publicly listed companies who get hacked actually plummet overnight. So the reputational risk is not something to be underestimated.
However, correct me if I'm wrong, the law is there when it comes to GDPR, not cybersecurity.
Right now, yes. In Malta, we don't specifically have a law. I mean, what we have is a few let's say, sections in the criminal code which deal with cybersecurity. It's a bit archaic, and on the other hand, it is covered very much by the EU directives and regulations which are coming into force and which obviously can have direct effect in Malta as well, and which we are to abide by. So it is not as clear-cut, and again, this is one of my passions. I always loved law and technology because I see that the technology pushes forward and makes the law sort of come into play to actually regulate something which is already superseded. It's always the technology which pushes the boundaries.
True.
And without wanting to, every couple of years, it's so innovative and technology keeps moving forward at such a fast pace that every 2-3 years you have to reinvent yourself to keep up with all the advancements that are happening.
What are some of the challenges associated with collecting threat intelligence to cybersecurity operations?
Well, one of the biggest threats is, as we're saying, it's so fast moving and things change so quickly that the minute that you, for instance, get to know of a new type of attack that is happening, I don't know, in the UK or somewhere else in Europe, it could have already happened to you and you wouldn't even have realized. So we do a lot of vulnerability assessments. There are tools and alarms which companies can have in place to be able to realize what might be coming towards you. But just to give you a couple of stats, for instance, Microsoft recently were stating that in their infrastructure, they would see something like 4,000 password attacks and attempts to breach passwords every second. So that is just one company. So you can imagine the amount of people who are out there just trying, to put effort into this to actually take other people's data is immense. I'll give you another example, social media. Recently, there was this, let's say, game or application where you could take a picture of yourself and it would show you what you'd look like in 30 years' time. Those are actually people who are behind it who are trying to take your facial recognition in order to use facial recognition instead of your passwords.
I'm scared now.
Yeah, so we have to be very careful when we play these types of games and be very discerning. I mean, I'll give you an even simpler example. People posting on social media, I'm off to a trip, I'm leaving the country and going somewhere else. So like in the physical space, I would probably advise against it and say, okay, when you come back, post as many pictures as you like. But don't announce that you're out of the country for 2 weeks where probably somebody might know where you live and you're, just making an open invitation to people to come and visit when you're not there. Similarly, in the cyberspace, we have to be very careful of how we make ourselves known out there and whether we have a robust infrastructure to harness our data or we don't.
Sometimes, as consumers, as clients, we are in a position where we have to give our data. You cannot say, I'm not going to give you my name, I'm going to give you my surname, I'm going to give you my mobile. What advice would you give to people when they are giving their data, when they need to provide the data? How can I assess whether a company is reliable, whether the service I'm getting requires that type of data, or whether it's just something extra they are asking out of me without needing it? What advice would you give?
Yes, I think there are various levels. I mean, in certain cases, in order to operate, I don't know if it's a government entity and we needed to submit our VAT returns or income tax return, that goes as a given. And you know that governments are doing their utmost to keep this information secure. Banks is a necessary thing, so you're going to have to provide it as well. And obviously trust that the bank that you are banking with has these structures and security measures in place. When it comes, for instance, to online purchases, the most basic is to see that you have the padlock next to the URL, so the name of the site. That means that the site at least has a level of security. Perhaps what you can do is a basic search to see whether this company has been hacked in the past and whether their information, they store information in a secure way or not. Another thing, nowadays there are some platforms where you don't really need to give a username and password. You can actually hide your email address, for instance, and use a hidden one. So these are things that you can do in order to try to mitigate as much as possible. Definitely another one is not to use the same password across multiple sites. And I mean, again, year on year, the most common password used is password. So these are stats that come out.
Password 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Password 1, 2, 3.
Exactly. So changing your passwords often is important. I know it is a big hassle.
Many companies actually are using
now
this. I've realized
now
they force it.
Yes.
I know it can be a bit of a pain.
It is.
Because you always have to remember what's your new password. But I've realized that many companies, especially obviously established ones and secure ones, are using this method where every so often you have to change your password.
It's pushed and it's forced and it's a necessary evil, which is very important to do. So for instance, if you go for ISO certification on cybersecurity, then that is one of the policies that you have to have in place in every organization, that passwords have to change every so often. Now it depends on your risk appetite as well, but I think going back to what we were saying before, companies need to start looking at this, and I do appreciate that there are a lot of instances where nowadays you have so many regulatory implications, compliance implications, and it costs a lot to do business. But this is one of those where it is of cardinal importance to do so, because it has so many implications otherwise. And going back to the point that every company is an IT company nowadays.
Thank you, Claire, for being with us. I think that was a very good information and a very good discussion, and I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with our viewers. Thank you, and thank you for watching That was Dr. Claire Cassar.